US officials have blasted the camps as a Chinese attempt to erase its own citizens' religion and culture.
The Chinese describe them as education and vocation centres. How would you describe them?
They are most certainly detention camps in which people are being held unwillingly, where they're stripping them of their identity.
We're shown a kindergarten where Uyghur children sing "I Love You, My Motherland." Here, every generation must learn China's language, laws and obey Beijing, or face the consequences.
It's the Drew Mariani Show on Relevant Radio.
Welcome back to the Drew Mariani Show. I'm Sheila Liaugminas. Drew's out for a few days off. He'll be back tomorrow. A lot of important topics today, and I know it's a lot of times Americans, understandably, we're a huge country. We have a lot going on, and in the pandemic, a year and a half now, what hasn't been touched by that? And everyone's still dealing with some form of that. And in the meantime, we're also more unified to the world, don't you feel? Because the world was hit by this as well. Well, there are many global issues that affect us here in this country, as well as our brothers and sisters across the globe. And as a universal church, we know that. But we are also in solidarity with those of other faiths who are persecuted, who are in harm's way. And we cover that all the time. So, too, this issue now. Setting it up, the Olympics have begun in Japan, or they're about to kick off if they haven't. I mean, of course, the opening ceremonies, whatever that's going to be like this year. But a lot of people are looking to next year's Winter Olympic Games that are scheduled to take place in Beijing, China. There are some people, you may have heard this, who are already calling it the Genocide Olympics, primarily because of how the Chinese government is treating the Uyghur people in what China called the Xinjiang province. BuzzFeed.com, which isn't my favorite source of news, but it's there, and I cover a wide array of news outlets. They do sometimes get things right, has reported with others that more than 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in so-called re-education camps over the last 5 years. Other estimates have been double that. BuzzFeed reported on Tuesday that China has built enough of these so-called re-education camps to hold more than 1 million people at the same time. Can you get your mind around that? More than 1 million people. These are our brothers and sisters in a faraway place, but this matters. BuzzFeed noted in their report that's enough space to detain or incarcerate more than 1 in every 25 residents of Xinjiang simultaneously. And that's assuming there are only 4 people to a room. A number of reports from former Uyghur prisoners who have escaped China say that the rooms are actually stuffed, sometimes with up to 10 people in the same small space, with people having to sleep in shifts or doubling up on single cots. Can you imagine that? Well, I hope we can get our minds around it because it's happening. So this is that and other things. I mean, we're talking about the Nineveh Plains. There's so many people who are endangered, who are persecuted. Talking to a congressman, leaving Afghanistan has left vulnerable many of the people who helped our forces there, and some have already been slaughtered by the Taliban as they moved in after we left. These things going on. Christians persecuted, other people, other religions persecuted. So it's actually quite possibly that there's room in those small spaces, since up to 10 people can fit in it, for 2.5 million people in these camps. 2.5 million people in these re-education camps in China at one time. This is partly why people like Representative Chris Smith, among others, of New Jersey, are calling for the U.S. to boycott the Winter Olympics. Salih Hudayar is the Prime Minister of the East Turkistan Government. Salih Hudayar is the Prime Minister of the East Turkistan Government in Exile. You may have heard him here on Relevant Radio or in other places. He is speaking out wherever he can be heard. He's Prime Minister of the East Turkistan Government in Exile. East Turkistan is what China calls its Xinjiang province. Salih, welcome to the program. Thank you for being here. We really want to hear your voice.
Thank you for having me.
Does this BuzzFeed report I just set up with match up with what you're hearing from the inside?
Absolutely. In fact, in recent, days, a researcher from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, who has been actually monitoring these camps and prisons in East Turkestan for quite a while, found that many of the prisons and camps in East Turkestan are actually expanding in size and in numbers. The Chinese government recently took AP and to one of these locations called the Beijing camp. Formerly, they used to call it a vocational training and re-education camp, but the Chinese government has now seemingly went to rebrand these camps as pretrial detention centers and prisons in an effort to legalize its mass internment of millions of Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples.
And yet, more people need to be aware of this. So, for one thing, is it this week, Salih, that is Captive Nations Week? I know you're calling on President Biden to formally recognize East Turkestan as an occupied country and address China's ongoing genocide of Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan. I know there's a rally. There's a rally there, right? This Friday, tomorrow, at the White House, and that's why? Because you're calling on him to stop the Uyghur genocide.
Yes, this week is Captive Nations Week, which has been commemorated since 1959 by the United States government. And we're calling on President Biden to address the root of the ongoing genocide. It's because China occupied East Turkestan and it's been colonizing it. This is why in recent years the Chinese government has ultimately taken its version of a final solution to eradicate, if not assimilate, the Uyghur people and other Turkic peoples in an effort to fully control East Turkestan.
Well, okay, so to the extent that you've been here for a while, talking to, as I said, everyone who will hear your voice, everywhere you're invited to go, Salih, and helping people to be educated and informed and aware of what's going on in East Turkestan. So, but yet, it doesn't quite seem that there's the political will on the international level to do anything about this at all. So break that into what's been the U.S. response. I know we've changed governments since you've been working here to generate awareness and raise awareness and work with the government. And then there's the rest of the Western world and the world at large. What has been the political will, in your opinion, on the international level to do anything about this at all?
Well, many governments, including, starting off with the United States government, they have officially designated China's atrocities as a genocide. Many parliaments in Europe have recognized it as a genocide as well. However, there hasn't been anything concrete or meaningful to really hold China accountable for these atrocities. Every year, as you know, the international community, especially world leaders across the world, they reiterate their commitment to never again in commemoration of the Holocaust. Yet, never again is essentially happening today in occupied East Turkestan, but governments have not been able to take meaningful action. Many of them are still, focusing on, prioritizing their economic and political relations over the human rights and genocide and other atrocities that are occurring in East Turkestan. And this is very sad because it's not only gives China the green light to continue, as you can see, they have been, continuing to expand these camps and prisons, but it also sends the wrong signal to other despotic regimes across the world that might want to engage in, atrocities against, certain ethnic and religious groups.
And they've been doing this, the atrocities. There have been a lot of them. I mean, against Christians, they're committing those atrocities. They're of course, forced abortions is part of it. Just to reset what people may have known or may have forgotten. Back in, I believe, early February, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo declared that the Chinese government was committing genocide against the Uyghur. And history has shown that condemning genocide publicly like that by a high member of government is an essential, at least first step in stopping it and preventing it from happening again. A lot of media figures downplayed the Uyghur genocide. That determination of genocide is merely Secretary Pompeo's parting shot at China. So, however, it was one of the most important human rights measures of the past 4 years. And it came, that declaration came, I'm just telling listeners, Salih, that it came after months-long deliberations by the State Department on global criminal justice. And it was based, what you're saying, on information showing that forced birth prevention measures were happening there in these re-education camps to suppress Uyghur demographics, and also as part of a destructive state campaign against minorities in the region. How well known are these facts? Do you get the sense?
Governments are aware of what's going on. This is indisputable. What is happening is indeed a genocide as defined under the UN Genocide Convention. However, it seems that the public slowly they have become, aware of the situation, but much of the public is still unaware. Slowly there are, people are becoming aware, but it's not enough. You don't see major media outlets, talking about genocide. You don't see, major, influential people, celebrities talking about it. In fact, many Western companies and, Western celebrities, including like NBA players, they have been utterly silent. In fact, they have, apologized to China in the sense of Kodak, for example. Recently, the Kodak company, they had published a post on their Instagram, which was actually a photograph of the scenery of East Turkestan, taken by a photographer. And the photographer, he had criticized China's ongoing campaign of genocide and other atrocities in East Turkestan, and this upset China, and therefore Kodak essentially kowtowed to China and, in an effort to appease them, removed the photo and, issued a statement apologizing to China and its government.
Yeah, I know I was going to bring that up to you, that the incident on this very issue and what happened with that. So then afterward, did China implicitly threaten Kodak? Do you think they threatened them into that or cowered them into that? How did that come about, in your opinion?
Absolutely. You had Chinese, state media. You had like Global Times demonizing, Kodak, saying that, they're falling into the Western game, as they called it, to demonize China. And then you had, the usual Chinese 50-cent army, posting negative things, saying that, they're offending the Chinese people and so forth. This is what the Chinese Communist Party always uses, saying, oh, you're offending the Chinese people by these comments, and essentially pressuring these companies to, take down the post and then issue an apology because, there's money to be made for those companies in China.
Yeah, a lot of companies are in China. In fact, some people, Salih, as you know, are either personally or as a group boycotting or just trying as much as they can to stop buying products from China and merchandise and other goods. That's pretty hard considering the mass amounts they produce. And when people go on, say, I don't know, Amazon to buy this or that, it turns out to have been produced in China. So they're doing a burgeoning business in many things. But Salih, should U.S. businesses just get out of China if they can or have the will to do so?
This is going to have to come from, all, top down or from bottom up. Ideally top down, because and essentially if U.S. companies do not get out of China, China is using, in addition to the, concentration camps and prisons, they're using the slave labor of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Uyghurs. And in fact, the U.S. government, the U.S. Congress has put forth a bill. The Senate recently passed a bill called the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which would essentially ban all goods that are made in East Turkestan, unless, those companies can prove that it's not being made by slave labor. However, you have the Chinese government, forcing hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs into Chinese provinces and essentially using them as slave labor in various Chinese factories inside China itself. So all goods that are made in China, are at risk of being, made with the slave labor of Uyghurs. Wow. So in this case, it would be great to, ban all goods made in China. Because one, the U.S. has a large trade deficit with China. even as of 2020, there's over $100 million trade deficit with China in terms of exports versus imports, and every bit of money that we spend buying goods that are made in China, a certain percentage of that goes back to the Chinese government, to the Chinese Communist Party, which they use to engage in atrocities such as genocide in East Turkestan, but also to build up their military and forces to engage in threatening acts and to engage in violation of other countries' territorial sovereignties, and to essentially recently they've built they're expanding their nuclear missile silos in China and across East Turkestan as well, aiming targeting the U.S. This is their biggest competitor or their biggest enemy, as the Chinese Global Times views it.
Yeah, well, we are, and yet I think we should. In fact, I was going to ask you that. How concerned should we be? I was going to work my way into that, but now that you mention that, we are very big competitors in many areas, and trade is certainly one of them, hugely. And so, a lot of people probably wonder, how concerned should we be about China? I mean, just as a force that probably wants to be the world's leading dominant power, superpower, and yet there is evidence from many places and data from in many places, demonstrable evidence that these atrocities are happening. And it's just mind-boggling, Salih, why there aren't consequences. It just seems like governments are afraid of them and have to keep a good relation on trade. Or is that the case in your mind? I know we're kind of saying that, but in different ways, because this comes up in each of these questions, because we have to address this. And at the same time, it continues to go on for a long time, one administration to the next, to some degree, addressed by an administration, to another degree, not addressed by the next administration. Maybe it is behind the closed doors of meeting rooms, but I'll tell you what, we'll talk about that next, Salih, because this is Captive Nations Week, and we really want to hear more about what you're asking and calling on this government to do, and especially with what's being called the Genocide Games, the Olympic Games next year in China. My guest is Salih Hudayar, Prime Minister of the East Turkistan Government in Exile. More on this next.
Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/Forester.
Feel like you're trying to make sense of everything happening in the world? We'll connect you to some clarity. The Drew Mariani Show on Relevant Radio.
Welcome back to the Drew Mariani Show. I'm Sheila Liaugminas in for Drew while he takes a few days off. He'll be back tomorrow. I'm talking about what some people have dubbed or call, actually almost rightly so, the Genocide Games. Why? Because they're going to take place. The Winter Games are going to take place in Beijing next year. And they're scheduled to. And there are some people who are already calling it the Genocide Olympics, primarily because of how the Chinese government is treating the Uyghur people in what China called the Xinjiang province. BuzzFeed.com, again, disclaimer, I do a lot of news gathering. I don't follow that one a lot. I check them out. And some of the things they get right are important to know. They might not be picked up elsewhere or in such a way as they're reporting it. Well, they're reporting with others that more than 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in so-called re-education camps. Just to reset here, if you weren't tuned in the last segment, these re-education camps over the last 5 years have just been burgeoning, just busting at the seams with more detained prisoners. Other estimate, and why? Why are they being in prison? Just for what they believe, just for who they are. Can you imagine that you're detained in a re-education camp because you're a Catholic? Well, that happens too. But other estimates double what some of these estimates are, more than 1 million. BuzzFeed reported on Tuesday that China's built enough of these so-called re-education camps to hold more than 1 million people at the same time. Some say it's even twice that. Because it's hard to get real numbers here, but a number of reports from Uyghur prisoners who have escaped China say the rooms people are detained in, which reportedly were 4 people to a room, are actually stuffed, sometimes with up to 10 people in the same small space. People having to sleep in shifts or double up on single cots. So it's really possible that there is room in these camps for 2.5 million people at one time, which is partly why people like Representative Chris Smith of New Jersey are calling for the U.S. to boycott the Winter Olympics. My guest on this is Salih Hudayar, the Prime Minister of the East Turkistan Government in exile. Very, of course, knowledgeable on all of this, and I took him back to, for your sake, so you could recall with him and with me that in February of this year, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo declared that the Chinese government is committing genocide against the Uyghur population, and history has showed that that kind of declaration of genocide is an essential initial step to stopping it and preventing it from happening again. Salih and I are talking about different things that are happening, including businesses like big old Kodak. That's a major corporation, right? Kodak folded to the pressure from the Chinese government and issued an apology and withdrew a picture that one of their people posted on Instagram, and it offended the Chinese government. What doesn't? But they pressured Kodak, and Kodak withdrew the picture and apologized. And we were talking about, well, should U.S. businesses just get out of China? And Salih was just saying how powerful they are, of course. And I was asking him if, of course, they want to be the world's superpower. So for that reason, Salih, let's pick up right there. The phone lines are open, 888-914-9149, this being the Captive Nations Week. They are in Washington, D.C., by the way. The population of the Uyghur, along with my guest, calling on President Biden to formally recognize East Turkestan as an occupied country and address China's ongoing genocide of Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan. You know, Salih, before we get back to China, the world's leading superpower and so forth, that's been a call you've made on governments for a while now. Quite a while I've been following this. Any gains you're making?
Unfortunately, not yet. Many governments are still reluctant to make this recognition. I mean, more recently, the U.S. State Department, under the Trump administration, designated Tibet as an occupied country. This has been reiterated by the current administration as well. So we are hoping that they designate East Turkestan as an occupied country as well, because essentially that is what is the root cause of this ongoing genocide. The name Xinjiang, which the Chinese government uses to refer to East Turkestan, essentially translates as the colony or the new territory, signifying that this indeed is not a part of China and that it is indeed occupied by China.
In fact, it has been, just to let people know, Salih, that it, in, I believe, late end of 1949, all the way back then when the People's Republic of China and its Communist Party took over, China colonized and annexed East Turkestan. And it was also known as the land of the Eastern Turks, Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Tatars, right, and others. And Captive Nations Law, formerly known as a public law number, the public law number doesn't matter, 89-90, includes Turkestan, Tibet, Manchuria, and mainland China as captive nations. But, you know, the Western governments, do they seem to you, Salih, to be afraid of China or just reticent to, you know, to anger them? Because they can really wield a lot of power. Yeah, so can the Western governments. So what is this very uneasy, not dance, but, you know, exchange like? When you really want this done, governments probably want this done, but maybe there's a fear factor of what would be the consequences to our people if the Chinese government come down harder.
Well, that is essentially, I think, the biggest issue is how would China respond to this? However, given the response on the Tibetan issue, which is just, you know, making a bunch of angry statements, like they always do, you know, there hasn't been anything significant come out of it. Just accusing the U.S. and other countries of, you know, being anti-China. In the same thing with East Turkestan, I mean, I doubt that the Chinese government is going to do anything significant. Sure, they might sanction a few officials or senators or congressmen from, you know, going into China, but it's not like they have assets in China or anything for them to go in there. So I don't think it will be as scary as many people in the government or Congress might fear.
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully you'll engage them. Just real quick while we still have time, I just want to back up what we're saying, Salih, that former detainees, so those who have escaped this, there are former detainees in among the Uyghur and other populations from this area, East Turkistan, in China, who have testified to being forcibly sterilized by injection. One woman said, quote, "That was when this is chilling. She said, that was when I understood the method of the camps, the strategy that was being implemented, not to kill us in cold blood, but to make us slowly disappear." That's so chilling. So slowly that no one would notice. So in 2018, Representative Chris Smith chaired congressional hearings over this, and they got more testimony about those who are restrained and tortured with electrical currents and mocked for their beliefs in God and forced abortions and even worse things happening. Meanwhile, Beijing is defiant about its repressive governance. And in fact, President Xi declares that the Xinjiang strategy, as he calls it, is totally correct and must carry on for a long time. It's horrifying. So therefore, Salih, the question is, the Chinese propaganda, they have a propaganda machine sort of like the Nazi propaganda machine, and it is in high gear. Are people believing what the Chinese government is saying, or are they just afraid of them?
I don't think anyone is really believing what the Chinese government is saying because, I mean, this is quite obvious. As far as the concentration camps, as far as everything that's happening, this isn't 1930s or 1940s under the Nazis. You can literally go on to Google Earth and view these camps with your own eyes, just opening up your own computer or even on your phone. So it's just a lot of countries, governments, corporations, they're all fearful of, upsetting China. They're fearful of, the political and economic consequences.
Well, so therefore, I know what you're hoping for out of the Biden administration as you tomorrow rally there, calling on President Biden to act on this and name it for what it is and take action against the Chinese government unless they stop this and demonstrably so. What are you expecting from that?
We're hoping that the Biden administration, formally recognizes this as East Turkestan as an occupied country and takes, more meaningful actions because sanctions and condemnations alone are not enough.